Hey everyone, Crow back again, and I've recently played all the games in Piko Interactive Collection 3. And every so often I change the way I do things, and you may notice that the format of this video will be a bit different. While I originally intended to start doing these videos unscripted, I've changed my mind on that. In fact, I'm reading off a script right now. But instead, the major difference is that I won't be spending as much time on each game as I have been in recent videos. So the plan here is to rank each game in the collection starting with my least favorite, along with my brief thoughts about each game, and then rank the collection as a whole against all previous Evercade collections. But first, let's briefly talk about Piko Interactive Collection 3 as a whole. There are 10 games included that were titles that were originally released on platforms such as the NES, the Genesis/Mega Drive, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and there's even a PlayStation 1 game in here. Well, I say released, but at least one of these games was originally cancelled before it was completed. These are all games from different developers and publishers, but the one thing they all have in common is that Piko Interactive now owns them. The collection itself comes in a standard clamshell case with a full-color manual, but that's it. Nothing extra is included with this one. And before I start talking about ranking the games, I want to say that I played all of these games on the Evercade VS, mostly with an arcade stick, but for the game 40 Winks, I had to break out the 8-bit-do SM30 Pro. So let's get started with my least favorite of the 10 games, and that has got to be Mech, Man and Machine, developed by Sculptured Software and originally released by Jaleco in 1990 for the NES. This sounds like a cool game where you get to ride around in a mech that looks like Ed 209, and at any time you could jump out and your little guy can run around and get to areas your mech can't. However, the game itself just isn't that fun. In order to finish each level, you've got to run around and find some item hidden around, and until you find it, you're just stuck there in the level. Level 1 isn't that bad, but level 2 is just way more complex, and with all the enemies constantly attacking you, the game wears thin pretty quickly. I found myself a level skip, and as I was skipping through the levels, I found that either levels 5, 6, or 7, somewhere around there, the gameplay just inexplicably changes to something entirely different altogether. It's very weird, and none of it plays particularly well, so I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10.
Round 1, fight!
In 9th, I've got to go with Punch King, a Game Boy Advance game that was developed by Full Fat and published by Acclaim in 2002. And this is a boxing game much in the style of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, and the game is just not good at all. The main reason this game isn't that great is because there's a real disconnect between what's going on between the gameplay, the graphics, and the sound. Where your character is on the screen bears no relevance as to whether or not your punches will land, or if you'll be able to dodge a punch. Your boxer can be all the way on the left side of the screen, and the opponent could be all the way on the right, and they could throw a punch that clearly doesn't make contact with your boxer, but you're going to get hit anyway unless you block or dodge. That's because the game acts like the fighters are always lined up on the screen, regardless of where they are. It's also not enough just to be able to block punches in this game, but you have to correctly be able to block high or block low appropriately with the punches being thrown, which can be incredibly difficult to read at times. But even if you're able to block a punch, the game relays absolutely no feedback whatsoever that you've blocked the punch. No sound effects or anything. It just looks like a broken game when you've successfully dodged a barrage of punches. Also, I managed to beat every boxer throughout the entire game using the same strategy of low punching just when they were about ready to throw a punch, and blocking for a while when I got tired. Then when the KO meter's filled, you just keep throwing punches until they fall over. This game's getting a 3 out of 10.
KO! You win!
In 8th, I'm going to put Legend of Wukong, a game originally developed by GameTech for the Taiwanese Mega Drive audience. In 2008, the game received an English translation by Super Fighter Team, and after playing this game for nearly 20 hours from start to finish, I have to wonder why. This isn't a good RPG, even for the time. There are just so many problems here with this one, starting with the extremely linear game path. I mean, there's absolutely no side quests in this RPG whatsoever. Then there's the clunky menu navigation, the fact that the game tells you nothing about any of the items or equipment you could buy, and what makes this extra annoying is that the Evercade manual doesn't bother to tell you about them either. I would imagine that the game's original manual would have this information, but I couldn't find any of this information or even a walkthrough while searching for this stuff online. The fights are all repetitive, including the boss fights, which are just like fighting the same enemies over and over and over again, just with different sprites. All of this, and not to mention that the game did soft lock on me at one point, and then there's the cap on all characters at level 50, which probably anyone would reach before finishing the game, and that just makes fighting anything after that point completely something not worth doing, because you're not going to earn any experience points after that point, so you just wind up running from every fight after that point. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10, and I actually think I might be a little too generous with that score. In 7th, it's gonna be Stanley, The Search for Dr. Livingston, which was developed by Sculptured Software and was originally released for the NES in 1992 by Electrobrain. On paper, this seems like it could have been a cool game. An overhead map where you select which nearby area you want to search, then you play a side-scrolling platformer as Stanley who searches each section of the jungle for items and clues as to the location of Dr. Livingston. The gameplay with this one is not good though, and it's not helped by the fact that Stanley's main form of attack is weak, short-ranged punches. You do have other forms of attack, but these are mainly consumables and you'll run out of them very quickly if you rely on them too much. It wasn't for quite a while where I actually found a machete for Stanley to replace punching everything, but even that can't prevent me from giving this a 4 out of 10. For 6th, I'm gonna go with Motor City Patrol, which was developed by Source Research and Development and originally released in 1992 for the NES by Matchbox. Yes, that Matchbox. This was only one of 2 games they ever released. At first glance, I think everyone has the same reaction to this game. Hey, this looks like Grand Theft Auto on the NES. And yeah, I thought that too. But when you play, you'll find it's exactly the opposite. In fact, you're the cop on the lookout for speeders and robbers. When you spot one, you'll throw your sirens on and pull in front of them to stop them and ticket or arrest them. Whatever's called for. You're even able to shoot from your vehicle to try and hit the tires of a robber's vehicle to slow them down. The game wouldn't actually be bad, except for the fact that in order to find out who's speeding or who's a robber, you have to hit select to see the map. You wind up having to do this every few seconds just to keep track of everything going on. This alone really kills the game as well as any fun you could potentially have. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10 as well.
You heard, Threadbare. If I can't get a good night's sleep, then why should anyone else? From now on, sweet dreams have been cancelled.
At number 5, I'm gonna go with 40 Winks from developer Eurocom. This version on the Evercade was originally for the PlayStation and was published by GT Interactive in 1999. There was also a version for the Nintendo 64 in the works, but that was cancelled and then was released 20 years later in 2019 after Piko Interactive picked up the rights. Alright, so this is a 3D platforming collectathon, and to be honest, I gave up on this one after about 45 minutes, and it's because of the lack of analog controls. From the second I heard this game was going to be on the Evercade, I wondered if the lack of an analog stick in a 3D platformer was going to be an issue. And it most certainly is, especially when the camera keeps rotating around when you're moving. In the captured footage, my character constantly looks like he's walking around drunk, and it makes it more difficult than it should be to attack any enemies you encounter. But it's extra difficult to do any of the actual platforming. I was repeatedly falling off of ledges and pits simply because my character started moving slightly in the wrong direction. The control issue alone is why I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. I'm sure this plays better on any platform that lets you use an analog stick, but I do not want to come back to this game on the Evercade. In fourth, it's gonna be Super Bubble Pop, developed by Runecraft and published by Jalico in 2002. This game was released for multiple platforms, but the version here in this collection was originally for the Game Boy Advance. You know, I kinda wonder why they didn't include the PlayStation version instead of the GBA version, but I guess I should just stick to what's actually here. You know, I'm pretty sure this game was a budget title originally. At least that's what it looked like to me when I first saw this game in a Best Buy over 2 decades ago. And playing it here, yeah, it feels like a budget game too. Turns out this game was a promotional device for a hairstyling product of the same name, so the focus clearly wasn't on making a good game. But ironically, I still found it better than over half the games in this collection. That's not saying much though, because it's still not that great of a game. You shoot bubbles, line 3 of them up with the same color, and they disappear. You do this until all the bubbles are gone, or you collect 3 stars. The longer you take, the more bubbles advance on you. There are power-ups in the game as well, but I found it very difficult to keep track of what I had and what did what. I found the best way to handle the game is to find a way to pop all the bubbles at the start of the level as fast as possible, before the game has a chance to advance bubbles on you. The level can be over in seconds instead of minutes. It's really the only interesting thing about this game. I can't say I like it or hate it. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. And number 3, I'm gonna go with Sword of Sodan, originally released for the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive in 1990. It was developed by Enterprise Software and published by Electronic Arts in the US and Europe. And if you're familiar with Sword of Sodan, you may be thinking, Sword of Sodan at number 3? I got crazy? Well, here's the thing. It turns out I actually liked Sword of Sodan, and I can't say that about any of the other games I've already talked about in this collection. Initially, I thought this was going to be much lower on the list just by reputation alone. But after I played it for a while, I found it actually wasn't that bad. I mean, it's not great or anything, but I found there to be actually a bit of strategy with this one. If you're just gonna go from left to right, focusing on attacking all your enemies, drinking one potion at a time, then yeah, it would be kind of tedious. But I really like the way the game let you combine potions for new effects like strengthening up your attacks, giving you a flame sword, making you invincible, and so on. Yeah, so not a great game, but I wouldn't say it's bad. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10.
Get out of my way, I'm Radikal Biker. Get out of my way, I'm Radical Man. Get out of my way, I'm Radikal Biker. Get out of my way, I'm Radical Man.
Okay. I had to play some of the Radikal Bikers theme song here, despite the fact the song obviously isn't in this Game Boy Color version that's included in this collection for the Evercade. Oh, I'm putting this in my number 2 spot, by the way. Anyway, Radikal Bikers was originally an arcade game by Galco, but did receive ports for the PlayStation and Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Color version was developed by Bit Managers and was going to be published by Infogrames, but you know what? It was cancelled. So I have to wonder if the version on the Evercade was a polished up version or if the game was just left in its mostly completed state. I will say though the game is pretty damn fun. Simply make it to each checkpoint before the time runs out while dodging traffic and picking up power-ups. It's kind of satisfying to kick a car and have it explode. The only gripe I have with this one is that the time limit seems way too short on the medium difficulty level. Other than that, this is a good one. 8 out of 10. And for my number 1 game in Piko Interactive Collection 3, it's Zero Tolerance, developed by Technopop and originally published by Accolade in 1994 for the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive. This one really took me by surprise. Mostly because I'm not really into first-person shooter these days, but when I do play them, I prefer to play them on the PC with a mouse and keyboard. This is on a Sega Genesis with a controller that has a D-pad and 3 buttons, with a POV view on the screen that doesn't even take up a third of the screen. And you know what? I had a blast with this one. The game is designed in such a way where it works incredibly well and it all feels very fair to play. There are 5 characters to choose from, acting like 5 lives for your playthrough. There are several weapons you can pick up, all satisfying to use in their own way. Navigating each level is fun, and you'll rarely get lost with the mini-map that's always on the screen, which can also help aid in shooting enemies if they're too hard to see on your main POV window. I'm telling you, the developers of this game really went out of their way to make a fun and very playable FPS on the Sega Genesis. I gotta give this a 9 out of 10. And that's all 10 games for Piko Interactive Collection 3. So let's rank this collection against all the other collections I've looked at so far. And you know what? This one ain't great at all. Out of 10 games, I only liked 3 of them. And one of those 3 was Sword of Sodan. And that's what makes this collection so hard to rank. If it wasn't for Radikal Bikers and Zero Tolerance, I'd easily give this one an F. And since I gave Zero Tolerance a 9 out of 10, I have to give this one at least a B+, since nothing on B or lower has a game with that high of a score. So I've got to give this one a B+, just solely because of Zero Tolerance and Radikal Bikers. But I'm going to put this as the lowest ranked B+ collection below Atari Collection 2. And that'll wrap things up for this video. The next collection I'll be looking at is number 30 in the console line, the Sydney Hunter Collection. I'll see you then.